Hi, I'm Matt Binnicker, the Director of Clinical Virology and Vice Chair of Practice in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic. In this month's Hot Topic, my colleague Dr. James Stubbs will present the final installment of a three-part series on transfusion medicine and transformational change. In the first two presentations, Dr. Stubbs presented how pathogen reduction and regenerative medicine are bringing about transformational change in the field of transfusion medicine. In this presentation, he'll discuss big data and how the treasure trove of information and data generated through the use of the internet and mobile devices can improve our ability to identify disease outbreaks and better manage our patients. I hope you enjoy this month's Hot Topic, and I want to personally thank you for allowing Mayo Clinic the opportunity to partner in your patient's healthcare.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I have nothing to disclose in relation to this presentation. I am here today to talk about transformation in transfusion medicine. I have identified three areas that are, in my opinion, primary drivers of this transformational change: pathogen reduction, regenerative cellular medicine, and big data. In this three-part series, we will address each of these drivers of change. Today, in Part 3, we will address big data. In 2009, a new flu virus was discovered. This new strain, called H1N1, spread quickly. Within weeks, public health agencies around the world feared a terrible pandemic was underway. Some commentators warned of an outbreak on the scale of the 1918 Spanish flu that had infected 500 million people and killed tens of millions. Even worse, no vaccine against the new virus was readily available. The only hope public health authorities had was to slow the spread of the virus. But to do that, they needed to know where it already was. In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention requested that doctors inform them of new flu cases. Yet the picture of the pandemic that emerged was always a week or two out of date. People might feel sick for days but wait before consulting a doctor. Relaying information back to central organizations took time, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention only tabulated the numbers once a week. With a rapidly spreading disease, a 2-week lag is a very long time. This delay blinded public health agencies at the most critical moments. A few weeks before the H1N1 virus emerged in the public eye, engineers at Google published a paper in the journal Nature. The authors explained how Google could predict the spread of winter flu in the United States, not just nationally, but down to specific regions and even states. They could do this by looking at what people were searching for on the internet. Since Google receives more than 3 billion queries every day and saves them all, it had plenty of data to work with. Google took the 50 million most common search terms that Americans enter and compared the list with Centers for Disease Control data on the spread of seasonal flu between 2003 and 2008. The idea was to identify areas infected by the flu virus by what people search for on the internet. In total, Google processed 450 different mathematical models in order to test the search terms and compared their predictions against actual flu cases from the Centers for Disease Control in 2007 and 2008. Their software found a combination of 45 search terms that, when used together in a mathematical model, had a strong correlation between their prediction and the official figures nationwide. Like the Centers for Disease Control, they could tell where the flu had spread. But unlike the CDC, they could tell it in near real time and not a week or two after the fact. Thus, when the H1N1 crisis struck in 2009, Google's system proved to be a more useful and timely indicator than government statistics. As a result, public health officials were armed with valuable information. This is an example of the power and value of big data analyses. We are in the midst of a shift in the mindset about how data can be used. Data is no longer regarded as static, where its usefulness is finished once the purpose for which it was collected is finished. Data is now a raw material that can be used and reused to fuel innovation, new analyses, and productive change. One way to think about this is the following. Big data refers to things that can be done at a large scale that cannot be done at a smaller one, allowing for the extraction of new insights that can lead to positive changes. Big data will challenge the way we think about the world. To meet the challenge, we will need to move away from our current preoccupation with the search for causality and move towards an approach where we look for correlations. We will have to learn to accept that in many cases we will not know why, but only what. This will be a major transformation because it overturns centuries of established practices, such as the approach to conducting research, and challenges our most basic understanding of how to make decisions and comprehend reality. At its core, big data is about predictions. It applies a method known as machine-based learning. Math is applied to huge quantities of data in order to infer probabilities, such as the likelihood that the type letters TEH are supposed to be THE. The key is that these systems perform well because they are fed lots of data on which to base their predictions. Furthermore, the systems are built to improve themselves over time by keeping a tab on what are the best signals and patterns to look for as data is fed into them. In the future, and sooner than we may think, many aspects of our world are being augmented or replaced by computer systems that, until recently, were the sole purview of human judgment. For example, there are now cars that can utilize information to parallel park themselves. Amazon can recommend an ideal book. Google can rank the most relevant website. Facebook knows our likes, and LinkedIn tells us who we know. The same technologies will be applied to diagnosing illnesses and recommending treatments. Just as the internet radically changed the world by adding communications to computers, so too will big data change fundamental aspects of life by giving it a quantitative dimension it never had before. Big data will be a source of new innovation. Big data's rise to prominence will represent 3 shifts in the way we analyze information that transform how we understand the world around us. In shift number 1, we will analyze far more data. In some cases, we will even be able to process all of the data in relation to a particular process or phenomenon. Since the 19th century, society has depended on using samples when faced with large numbers. Yet the need for sampling is an artifact of a period of information scarcity, a product of the natural constraints on interacting with information in an analog era. Before the prevalence of high-performance digital technologies, we didn't recognize the limitations of sampling. We just took it for granted. Using all the data lets us see details we could never see when we were limited to smaller quantities. Big data gives us an especially clear view of the granular, including subcategories of the data that sampling cannot adequately assess. In shift number 2, looking at vastly more data permits us to loosen up our desire for precision. It's a trade-off. With less error from sampling, we can accept more measurement error. When our ability to measure is limited, we count only the most important things. Until recently, all of our data mining was premised on precision. We assumed database engines would retrieve the records that perfectly matched our query. This type of thinking was a function of a small data environment. With so few things to measure, we had to treat what we did bother to quantify as precisely as possible. Often, big data is messy and varies in quality. With big data, will often be satisfied with a sense of general direction rather than knowing a phenomenon down to the inch, the penny, or the atom. This brings us to shift number 3, which is a move away from the age-old search for causality. As humans, we have been conditioned to look for causes. Even though searching for causality is often difficult and may lead us down the wrong paths. In the big data world, by contrast, we won't have to be fixated on causality. Instead, we can discover patterns and correlations in the data that offer us novel and invaluable insights. The correlations may not tell us precisely why something is happening, but they alert us that it is happening. And in many situations, this is good enough. If millions of electronic records reveal that cancer sufferers who take a certain combination of lima beans and okra see their disease go into remission, then the exact cause for the improvement of health may be less important than the fact that they achieved remission. Before big data, our analyses were usually limited to testing a small number of hypotheses that we defined well before we even collected the data. When we let the data speak, we can make connections that we had never thought existed. The potential insights from big data has led experts in the field to declare that there is a treasure hunt now underway. It is driven by the insights to be extracted from data and the value that can be obtained through a shift from causation to correlation. This diagram illustrates the flow of data and the uses of such data currently being managed in our operating room data mart system. This system is currently a crucial component of our blood management system at Mayo Clinic. While not all I am going to talk to you about from here on is truly big data per se, these publications are examples of using more extensive data mining to help us understand and practice transfusion medicine. The first is a paper that describes the evaluation of case detection algorithms for transfusion-related acute lung injury and transfusion-associated circulatory overload. And it compared such detection to more traditional approaches in a retrospective analysis. The use of computer-based medical record surveillance algorithms showed good sensitivity and specificity for identifying transfusion-related acute lung injury and transfusion-associated circulatory overload cases, and supported that active electronic surveillance could improve case identification. Of the true transfusion-acute lung injury and transfusion-associated circulatory overload cases identified by these algorithms, only 14.1% and 11.1% respectively were actually reported to the blood bank. In the second paper, the question of whether preoperative prophylactic plasma transfusions mitigate bleeding complications for patients with elevated international normalized ratios, that is INR values of 1.5 or higher, who are undergoing non-cardiac surgery was evaluated. The study involves an analysis of data from 14,743 patients using our data marts and other data repositories. The study disclosed that preoperative plasma transfusion for elevated international normalized ratio coagulation test values was associated with an increased rather than a decreased frequency of perioperative bleeding complications. The findings of this study suggest that more conservative management of abnormal preoperative international normalized ratios is warranted. In the final paper, individuals at our institution's Bioinformatics Center are taking data analyses to the next level in our approach to big data. These folks are interested in developing a tool to achieve true individualized transfusion medicine as it pertains to indications for transfusions and the identification of individuals at increased risk for transfusion-associated adverse events. The goal of the work in this paper was to apply advanced machine learning methods to study the relationship between preoperative plasma transfusion and perioperative bleeding in patients with an elevated international normalized ratio undergoing non-cardiac surgery. This was a companion study to the one previously presented. The results showed that both machine learning and standard statistical methods, as performed in the previous study, generally agreed that preoperative plasma transfusion negatively impacted perioperative bleeding. This paper was able to utilize machine learning to quantify in a meaningful way the effect of not transfusing. In the future, machine learning methods could potentially be used to identify a subpopulation for which no plasma transfusion increases the risk of bleeding during surgery versus a subpopulation for which no plasma transfusion poses no increased risk of bleeding during surgery. Therefore, we are taking steps towards being able to derive true individualized indications for transfusions. Individualized transfusion medicine to this degree is possible in the future, quite possibly in the near future, and this will transform transfusion medicine as we know it today. This brings us to the end of our new beginning in transfusion medicine. I would like to acknowledge the great value of this book listed here on this slide. It helped inform me and inspire me on the potential of big data.